Since Crimewatch UK began, there have been some remarkable ways in which viewers have helped solve serious crimes. Now, in Crimewatch File, we shall be telling some of those stories. The investigation, which is the subject of our first programme, made criminal history. The detectives themselves have taken part in our reconstruction of their inquiry, and where necessary, other people are portrayed by actors. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of witnesses, but otherwise everything you see in the film that follows is based on special access to detectives' files and on evidence from eyewitnesses, forensic scientists and the courts. Hoddesdon and the village of Broxbourne next to it are right on the border of Essex and Hertfordshire. In spring 1985, a chance discovery outside a bungalow called Emerald set off an extraordinary chain of events. One of the schoolboys who made the discovery has since been identified only as Witness A.
Out of the house. Just throw it away. It's revolting.
As soon as I opened it, I could see the way it was laid out, by the firing pin mainly. On night exercises, we used tripwire alarms to let off 12-bore blanks. They worked more or less on the same principle. The electronics were exactly the same as my radio-controlled car. I knew Mum and Dad wouldn't believe me. I think it was mainly because I didn't understand how it worked. I started taking it apart, but I could never get it to work, so it never got put back together, and bits were gradually thrown away.
Early in the morning, several men brandishing guns burst into a company on wages day. They hold the staff hostage, and then they try to ambush the security van when it arrives. We've reconstructed their most recent raid, where this time they did succeed and they got away with £90,000. Imperial Cold Stores was a depot for hops en route from Kent to breweries in the Midlands. Friday was wages day.
Do you know what this is? It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch of a button, it goes off.
You open this bloody door! I can't blow your bloody head off! I can't open it!
And also of a son born this year. Derek Hutton is Labour's deputy leader of Liverpool City Council, which, in case you haven't heard...
Do you know what this is? It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch of a button, it goes off.
Mum? Mum? Mum, can I have a look at this?
What we're going to do is take your mate out some tea, get him out
What are you watching?
It's Crimewatch. You must have taped that as well.
Blow your back out, understand?
Hang on, I'll rewind it.
It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch
Look
of a
there,
button, it goes
it's that
off.
bomb thing, you know, like the one I found. It is, isn't it? Will you let me ring him up? Go on, let me ring him up.
No, just play the tape, Paul. Let's watch the programme before you get overexcited.
On the night of the programme itself, I think we received somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 calls at the studio, and it was probably 2 or 3 days before I received a telephone call from Hoddesdon Police, who told us about this young boy that had told them he had found an identical device in a rubbish sack some months before.
I don't know if I'll get all the detail of that.
Just do what you can remember, Paul. I was a bit sceptical that the lad may have been making the information up, having seen the programme, but he drew the 4 corner posts to the box, which at that stage finally convinced me that what he had in fact seen was the bomb that was used at the Cross and Herbert's robbery.
From April 1985, we identified a particular gang from description, from their method attacking premises early in the morning, taking staff hostage at gunpoint, intent clearly upon stealing the contents of the security van. But in 2 of those offences, an exploding device was used. It was a viable device, although we are not, of course, showing you all of it here. It was indeed fortuitous that the family of this young boy had videoed the Crimewatch programme, and that he, that evening, whilst at random flicking through, happened to latch on to the very point in your film where you displayed this exploding device. And that gave us an address. In fact, it gave us Emerald to concentrate upon. Emerald is in a very desirable area of Hertfordshire. It's in Broxbourne, in a road called Riverside.
As far as the local officers were concerned, they had no personal knowledge of either the previous owner or the current owner. As far as the previous owner was concerned, we had a family which had moved very recently to a more expensive house, and we were also able to establish that the previous owner had his own electrical company, which again we thought may be the possible link between him and the explosive device. We decided to come down, sit outside early in the morning and note the comings and goings from the premises in the hope that by doing that we may be able to find some association with him and people that possibly known to us as being involved in robberies in some way. And I was certainly convinced that we were on the right track and it was just a case of sticking with it.
As the flying squad continued the inquiries in London, events in Harlow in Essex added a new and even more serious dimension to the investigation.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
See you in the morning.
One does take different routes to work, or if a car is behind you for a little bit more than normal, one does tend to go round a block once or twice. When one does see robberies on television, it does tend to make you a little bit more cautious. When I came into the room, I saw this man over there and another one behind me with a shotgun. They made me sit in a chair, handcuffed me. And then I saw my wife and daughter handcuffed to the table over there.
Can you imagine that there's a knock on the door? They're waiting for, the wife waiting for her husband, Joe, to return. And at 7 o'clock, there's a knock on the door. And when it's opened, in rushed the villains. Balaclavas, shotguns, the lot. That alone must have been frightening. But then to sit Mrs. Symes down and her daughter, to handcuff them and say, we're waiting for your husband, nothing will happen, be quiet. And there's more arrived with guns, must have been very traumatic and very frightening indeed.
At first he said, well, you obviously realise what we're here for. And they said, we want you to take us up there in the morning and open the safe up so we can help ourselves.
During the course of the night, and prior to the villains leaving the house, they bound Mrs. Symes and her daughter to the bed and gagged them and left them in that state. Mrs. Symes and the daughter find it very, very difficult to talk about their experience of what went on that night. And I don't think they ever will.
One of them produced a box with a red light on it attached to a belt, which they said was a bomb, which they could control would be controlled by remote control. And they suggested in the morning you would stick it under the seat of your car, and if I did not do anything they wanted, they'd detonate it. A few minutes to 6 o'clock, Bill Borman arrived and he had Steve Perry with him. another chap. They got out their car, he locked his car, and I got out of mine. Said, morning, and I locked the outer gate.
They then instructed Joe to open up the inner doors, and it was from the strong room that some £500,000 was stolen.
They just raced in there, and after about 9-10 minutes at the most, one of them shouted, "This is it, lads," and they picked up what they had, locked us in the safe and went.
As far as I know, this was the biggest robbery Essex had had, and it's unfortunate to say, even taking into account all the hard work that had been done, we were getting nowhere.
I was seconded out to Essex for almost a week because obviously there were certain aspects of that robbery which were very, very similar to the 4 we had already linked.
On this occasion, a depot was robbed. The device that was used was a mock-up device, and what struck us was that perhaps the gang had seen the Crimewatch programme and in fact involved in copycat tactics.
I personally at that time wasn't convinced it was connected with the robberies we were already dealing with. I was always aware that that offence had been committed, but there seemed to have been a lot more planning, and it seemed very strange to me that a team that had been using a viable device on the robberies would then switch to a dummy device.
So uncertain whether the Armour Guard robbery was by the same gang, detectives continued occasional observation on both the previous and the current occupants of Emerald.
As you can see from the location of Emerald, it made it very difficult for us to actually sit down here and watch anything for a long period of time. It's a private road, cul-de-sac, so all we really had to rely on was the occasional drive-through and drive back again. And in fact it was on one of these drive-throughs early one morning on the way to work that there were 3 vehicles seen on the driveway: a Porsche, an Audi GT and a Nissan Sunny Estate. Checks on that vehicle revealed that it belonged to a Dolly Ince, who we knew was married to George Ince, a man known to us as having a conviction for a serious armed robbery.
Dolly Ince previously was Dolly Cray and married to Charles Cray, the brother of the Cray twins. George Ince, in 1973, was convicted of armed robbery at the Old Bailey.
George Ince left for his wedding from Wormwood Scrubs prison, where he's in the 4th year of a 15-year sentence for a bullion robbery. It's a crime his supporters say he didn't commit, but today there were no demonstrations. The 2 prison officers escorting the groom wore civilian clothes, and a raincoat, clearly unnecessary on a hot, fine day, hid the handcuffs which held Mr. Ince captive. The bride had arrived a few minutes before. It was her evidence about their love affair which cleared George Ince of killing a Mrs. Muriel Patience in what became known as the Barn murder case, before he was convicted in another case for robbery.
The apparent link between George Ince and the people now living at Emerald suggested the detectives' first hunch had been wrong. The new residents suddenly began to look far more interesting to police than the previous ones.
Our discovery on the 4th of February of that year changed the direction of our inquiry, inasmuch that we were able completely to clear the previous occupant of the property. He comes out of our inquiry whiter than white. If ever he wants a reference, he can come to me and get the Flying Squad seal of approval. And we were then looked much, much more closely at the new occupant, David Krogh. David and Rita Krogh, when we looked at them first of all, had convictions for minor shoplifting, and although we could never identify his occupation, we had no reason to identify him as an armed robber. We, of course, could not move at that stage against the Kroghs. All we had was mere suspicion, and that is obviously not sufficient in law. All we would do is alert people that we are maintaining an interest in them, and our inquiries moved to a closer surveillance.
Stand by. Green car, possibly a Golf, left out of Riverside, towards the car park. Bob, can you get a close look at that vehicle and confirm who's in it? I think target 1's the passenger. I can't see who the driver is. When we saw Croak as the passenger in a very expensive limited edition VW Golf, initially we were unable to identify who the owner of that Golf was.
I was aware that a man by the name of Donald Barrett was using the vehicle. Now, some 6 or 7 years previous, I had in fact had personal dealings with Barrett when he was arrested for a series of armed robberies. He was subsequently accepted as a Supergrass, and I knew that he was at that time out of prison, having been released some months previous.
We had to move into a proactive role. Here was a man who was one of the foremost armed robbers in London, clearly capable of committing all the offences that we had linked, and also the armour guard offence.
Target vehicle is past the dog's home, and it's a stop, 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 and the driver's out of the vehicle. It's definitely target 2. He's wearing a light shirt, dark tie, and jeans. He's back to the vehicle, and it's an off, off, off.
All units, hold back, hold back. I think this is a cul-de-sac. All units, contact with the target vehicle. They're into the one-way system. They're following the system round. And he's coming out, back towards you.
It was on one of these occasions that a team of us took Barrett and Croak down to an area of Battersea, and in fact onto an industrial estate, which we later found contained a security depot, which we believe that they were in fact looking at.
From our observations, it was clear that they were planning to rob a security depot called Shield, which is in the Nine Elms area of Battersea. And if they are sophisticated enough and have the ability to attack and rob such a depot, it's fair to assume that in fact they were the team who committed the armour guard robbery.
Travelling to Faro today, are you? You're travelling to Faro today?
Yeah.
Yes, OK. I'd like to put your bags on the scales.
As Barrett flew out of the country on holiday, detectives were still preparing for a robbery any day on the depot at Battersea.
Hello.
I was out that day really just to have a good look at the depot and the surrounding area. And I recognised the red Golf as being a vehicle registered to what I thought was an associate of David Croak. And it struck me at the time that perhaps this team of robbers had actually someone working in Shield.
Our concentration on Emerald has now yielded David Croak, Donald Barrett, and then yielded for us Alan Turner. Interesting chap, Al Turner, because we identified that he lived in Clacton, visited Emerald, and turned up at the depot at Battersea, clearly employed at that establishment. It was clear that they had an inside agent at that depot.
Hello?
It's Dave Croak.
Listen, if Don rings, tell him the run's on and it's
Double bubble. You got that?
Yeah, OK, I got it. I'll tell him. See you then.
When preparing for a plot of this nature, certainly I have to be aware not to do anything which may possibly alert the people that are going to be concerned in the robbery, which therefore, in this case, meant that I couldn't go anywhere on that estate to try and find suitable premises from which we could conduct an observation. Also, I had to consider, in the event of any attack being given, that people may scatter, and as you can see here, the railway lines. Hence, I went straight to the pub at the end of the road, which was ideally suited for giving us a view.
Yes, Don, he said the run's on. OK, I'll tell him you're coming back.
DC Shapland and my other officers were feeding her back intelligence, and the picture was developing that really we think the operation was going to actually take place. And so, with that in mind, we assumed that the target premises was going to be Shield Security. Now, this area here is the Nine Elms area of Battersea. It's an industrial estate, as you'll see. That there is Nine Elms Police Station. I had 3 observation posts, one just out of shot here, which was a public house that gave me good vision onto the area here at the front of Shield. This was where I personally was, and I had line of sight right the way through and could see any activity down here and people arriving. And the police station provided an ideal opportunity to see the vehicles coming in and out. There's only one way in through there and one way out through there, so that gave me line of sight on people coming in and people going out. So by the Sunday night, things were really beginning to happen. Barrett had suddenly come back from holiday. That was significant in itself. And then we see Croak and Barrett are followed down to Turner's address in Essex. Now, that had to be a planning meeting. They were there a few hours and came back, and by 10 o'clock or so, they're back at Broxbourne. We put them to bed, and I maintain a 24-hour observation on them. We knew from their activities at Armour Guard that we had a possible hostage situation here, and this was very much like Armour Guard, and therefore my planning for this operation was very much a containment one. Let the suspects come in and then seal off the area. Because of the potential for hostage, as there's been with this and other offences, I deployed the PT-17, the Tactical Firearms Unit, the Blue Berets, who were very skilled at that sort of idea. If hostage situation could be protracted, we needed their skills and firepower if necessary. I deployed as my second option officers of the flying squad who were skilled in mobile and in surveillance with their other support units from New Scotland Yard, in order that if there was to be a breakout or they were to move from here, I had an ability to follow and to arrest elsewhere. And by the early hours of the Monday morning, I had deployed something like 80 officers, and radio silence was being maintained. And then our first indication was on the Monday morning at about 4:20 a.m, very early and very significantly, Barrett and Croak were out.
The 2 main suspects left home on foot, leaving their nice cars at home sort of thing, and went to a lock-up garage and took out an old van and started travelling towards Battersea. That's the first time that I felt that it was really going to be on that day.
Provided we can get rid of this condensation, everything will be fine.
I don't really think I want to eat anyway.
So in the early hours of the morning, Barrett and Croak are on their way down, travelling south towards us. Our first real sign of any real activity is about 5:45, when Turner himself comes round here onto the estate.
Stand by. Turner's just arrived in his GTI. He's reversing, parking next to the hamburger stall. Wait a minute. Yeah, he's out the vehicle.
Where's he going?
Wait a minute. Yeah, he's gone out my sight now.
A few minutes later, Turner's co-driver for Shield Security was seen through from the observation post to come in and take the same route as Turner and come and park beside him here.
Stand by. This is the known employee. He's out of the vehicle. Turner's approaching him. They're both talking by the side of the known employee's vehicle.
Just at about 6 a.m, the real event happened was that Croak and Barrett had been followed right the way down and were seen to come through past the observation post and enter.
As soon as that van arrived in the area of Battersea and went on round to where the Shield depot was, the mood changed completely and everybody became geared up, ready for an attack to be given if necessary.
I don't think there's any doubt you do get nervous. I don't think you'd be human if you didn't get nervous when you know you've got suspects, armed suspects, coming on when you're sitting waiting for them, yes, you do get very nervous.
Suddenly, I get a coded message from my observation post here that the blue escort van with Croak and Barrett actually leaves the estate and goes and parks nearby.
There's a driving, stand by. Driver's reversing. He's out of the vehicle. He's been joined by the other two and towards the front door now. They're in the front gate. Yes, and they're now into the premises, all into the premises. The known employee and the known target are out of the premises. The known target is carrying a small shoe-type box. And the target is into the vehicle. The vehicle's reversing. Now off the front yardage, towards Tom, and it's a right, and off.
Because suddenly it didn't look as if the depot was going to be the actual target premises. Now that gave me a real problem, simply because I had a vehicle with perhaps a considerable amount of valuable commodity on board, money, cash, gold, and two armed robbers in the near vicinity.
You get a feeling of indecisiveness. You don't know, has the job been called off or what?
I decided that I would deploy officers that I had, flying squad officers, in the vicinity to make up a convoy to follow the target vehicle wherever it was going to go.
All the plans we've made have gone, really, because although we did have the surveillance as a backup, we were 99% sure it was going to be the depot. And then we've got to start hounding round for troops to follow the convoy wherever it was going. Disappointment for me, because I thought we were going to take them at the depot. I really thought they were there to the depot and it was going to be nice.
We've got the van with the two guards in and the gold, which is being followed by the van with the two suspects in, which is being followed by the surveillance team.
Nobody knew where they were going to go. And I remember thinking to myself as we rounded Hyde Park Corner sort of thing and went up, what's the name of the road?
The Edgware Road.
The Edgware Road, thank you. Where are we going to go to now? You just didn't know, and it went on and on and on, and there in the distance was the bullion vehicle, followed by the suspects. You're just in the lap of the gods, really, to see what's going to happen.
You could be a half a mile behind and still see this bright white van followed by a tiny blue one behind it all the way. Going up the motorway was a little bit unusual for us, because usually a lot of our work is in town. I don't think the blue van had a vehicle in between the security vehicle all the way up.
We obviously knew we were at Newport Pagnell on the motorway. We were pulled up on the hard shoulder, probably about a quarter of a mile to half a mile short of the service area, although we were in radio contact with the surveillance officers and we knew exactly what was going on within the area, service area itself.
All units, guard out towards the restaurant area. Target vehicle is stationary in the car park. Stand by. Targets 1 and 2, both out of the van and towards the restaurant.
You could hear that there had been a meet between the driver of the bullion vehicle and the suspects.
Guards into the building. 1 and 2 under control. One and 2 back towards their vehicle.
Stand by. Guard, back to the car park. All units, definitely back towards the security van.
Once it comes to the moment where they're going to rob the van, I think they get what can best be described as tunnel vision. And at that stage, they're completely oblivious of what's going on around them. They've just got one goal in life, and that is to rob the van or rob whatever they're after.
Shortly after that, you could hear that one of the suspects was in fact driving the bullion vehicle and leaving the slip road onto the motorway.
Definitely target one, driving the security van.
And it was at that stage that Mr. Grange gave the attack.
It's a build-up of adrenaline, it's a build-up of nerves, and then when you get the attack, it's released. I don't know what the other chaps feel, but I haven't really felt anything else like it, to go across the pavement and nick a team of armed robbers.
It's very difficult to describe because you're moving very, very quickly, but once it's all over, once you've got them down the ground, handcuffed, you've got their guns away from them, then it's a feeling of relief more than anything, the fact that you're not hurt and nobody else is hurt and they are nicked.
When you saw him standing there, he was exceptionally cool, calm and collected. There's no other way to describe him, really. I mean, he seemed the business, I think. Really seemed very professional.
And I'll never forget the first words he said to one of the officers who he knew. He said, "Hello, Phil. Nice little chickle you've had here." And that was on the M1 with firearms all around, vehicles buzzing up and down, and he recognised an officer and basically congratulated him for the work he'd done.
I then went further back down the motorway to where Croak was being dealt with. And then we made arrangements for them to be photographed and taken into the local police station.
By 2 o'clock that day, officers had arrived at Emerald. Rita Croak was just leaving with a shotgun cartridge and a CS gas gun. She was taken to Milton Keynes police station and initially charged with conspiracy to rob. The 2 security guards had been handcuffed in the van during the robbery. One was entirely innocent. The other, Al Turner, turned out to be Rita's son. He was later charged with robbery and firearms offences. David Croak was also taken to Milton Keynes police station and charged with robbery and firearms offences. But attention now centred on Donald Barrett. If police were to find evidence on other offences or to arrest any other members of the robbery team, then it would be through him. The question was, could Donald Barrett become the first person in British criminal history to become a Supergrass for the second time?
Well, following his arrest, we realised that here we had something very important, that this team were responsible for a whole series of sophisticated and very violent crimes. And the idea he could provide us a link. We asked him whether he would cooperate, and he said yes.
Mr. Grange is upstairs. We might as well go up and see him now.
Yeah,
I'll come back to you later, OK?
Yeah.
Whilst he was at Newport Pagnell, I, in London, began the process of seeing the senior police officers at New Scotland Yard and the Director of Public Prosecutions to get their agreement. It wasn't an easy decision because he'd been a resident informant, a Supergrass, as you would want to call him, in the past. Here was an absolute unique occasion of a man who could be taken on board as a resident informant for a second occasion. Never been done before.
Right from the start, the arrest on the M1, Barrett showed great concern as to what was going to happen to him. Being an ex-Supergrass, where were they going to put him? Where could he go in the system?
There were 2 things that must have been paramount in Barrett's mind. One was how to keep himself safe, and 2, the least possible sentence.
Also in his mind was that Croak may wish to become a resident informant. He based that on Croak having asked him many questions about how he was dealt with previously as a Supergrass. He had to basically, I think, get in first.
Barrett had served his previous sentence apart from other prisoners in the Supergrass wing at Bedford Prison. But he knew that he could only get that protection again if he were to have the same status.
It's clear that he was going to go to prison for a long time and would be rubbing shoulders, perhaps with people against whom he gave evidence in the past. Those people would, without doubt, take his life. Donald Barrett could never live through a prison sentence. He wouldn't even get to trial.
From a special incident room, 12 detectives began to re-investigate the offences and criminals Barrett was telling them about.
Certainly the first 6 months of the inquiry were the most intense. From Dick and my point of view, we were continually in and out of this room, which we endearingly call the bunker, into the unit next door where Barrett's kept.
Ironically, that was the same special unit Barrett had been in 8 years before. Including the Armour Guard robbery and the one shown on Crimewatch, Barrett admitted his part in 11 crimes, worth £1.4 million. On one occasion, the gang had restolen some of the Brinksmat gold. They threatened people with explosives and doused a man with petrol. Among 13 other people arrested on Barrett's word was Glenn Armsby, who lived with Rita Croke's daughter and was the third member of the gang who'd held Joe Symes and his family hostage. George Ince was arrested and held for a number of weeks before all charges were dropped and he was released. His wife, Dolly, never featured in the police inquiry.
You get to the stage where the information concerning the offences have run out and you're left with what to talk about. Personally, I found it was quite easy with Barrett because he's been around for a long time, but then again, so have I. And we had a lot of mutual criminals in common that we could talk about.
There is a very real danger. It's described as the Stockholm Syndrome, where the hostages and the hostage takers get so very close. In this case, we have got the prisoner and the police officers.
There's a real presence about him, and almost like a caged tiger in many ways. But for all that, we're able eventually, over a period of time, to work together very effectively.
The detective officers who have the investigation of the offences do not have the care and custody of the Supergrass. In fact, the Supergrass is looked after by uniformed officers who work under strict Home Office guidelines.
The way that the courts treat the evidence of a Supergrass, quite rightly, is very sceptically. And we then had to set about to corroborate all the aspects that Barrett told us about. And that took us all around the country. It took us to France, took us to Malta. So it was important that what he said, we were able, in some other way, to prove or corroborate.
David had gone out to Malta after Armour Guard. Someone called Victor looked after his flat and boat. The boat was originally called Armour Guard or something like that.
Detectives went to Malta and searched the Crokes' flat there. Among other evidence, they found the boat Barrett had mentioned. It had been repainted, but the name Croke had rather foolishly given it showed up under ultraviolet light.
Having checked the obvious that Armag wasn't a local Maltese word, we now had this excellent corroboration for what Barrett had already told us in his statement and would later be giving evidence in any court proceedings.
I've been asked about a bank account held by David Croke at the Bank of Ireland, Seven Sisters Road. The account was in the name of T. Moore. I had some cheques from this account signed by Croke in the name T. Moore.
We recovered a great deal of correspondence in the name of T. Moore and David Croke in a briefcase. We also went to the Bank of Ireland, and there we saw all the evidence recorded in the bank statements, paying in slips and cheques, which completely corroborated what Don Barrett in fact had told us. From this wealth of evidence, we're able to prepare a picture which shows David Croke's finances. The blue column shows what Don Barrett says their share of cash was, and the pink column shows what cash is shown as being paid into the bank account. These two columns here relate to the offence at Armour Guard, where Don Barrett says that David Croke had about £140,000 as their share of the robbery, and the pink column clearly shows that about £140,000 was indeed paid into Croke's bank account.
Barrett was also required to confront his former accomplices before giving evidence against them in court.
Gentlemen, for the sake of the tape recorder, would you please identify yourselves?
D.C. Cuthbertson. Donald Barrett.
D.C. Shapland.
Mr. Barrett, can you identify this man in the corner?
Yes, I can.
Who is he?
Dave Croke.
Now, bearing in mind that you're still under caution, Mr. Barrett, between the 11th and the 12th of December 1985, there was a family by the name of Symes taken hostage, followed by a robbery at the Armour Guard depot at the Pinnacles, Harlow. Were you involved in that, Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Who else was involved?
Dave Croke, Glenn Armsby.
Anything you want to say about that, Mr. Croke? Mr. Croke doesn't wish to say anything.
The main man, David Croke, in this case, really said not one word
when he was being interrogated. In fact, I think the only thing that he said to me during a tape-recorded interview was, "I want my solicitor to be here," when he decided he didn't like the way that I was asking questions of him. But that was all, and yet Croke pleaded guilty to a number of very, very substantial robberies.
Rita Croke also knew that Barrett would testify against her, and she pleaded guilty to the single charge of possessing a prohibited weapon.
What it's also been able to do for us as professional detectives is actually give us an insight how the criminals actually work, how they plan, incredible, meticulous planning, certainly in relation to armour guard.
The armour guard job was a year in the planning, although we did do other robberies during that time. I went there in a vehicle with Dave in the boot, with holes in it for him to see what was going on. We used a Honda van with boxes in the back. During this time, we got to know the key holders, Bill Warman and Joe Symes. Dave suggested we should go into Warman's address the night before and hold the family hostage. But this had to be a sweet job, and you simply can't wrap up kids. Although the research on Warman took 2.5 to 3 months, we had to scrap it. Dave said the only other way to do it was to plot up on the other key holder, Joe Symes.
Over a period of many months, Barrett made detailed allegations about the involvement of other well-known London criminals in various robberies. In many of those cases, police could not corroborate Barrett's allegations against the people he named.
It's not for us to say that people are guilty, although if it were, I can promise you that the streets of London will be safe from crime. You get a feeling that, especially when there is evidence available that people, like some of those who got away, are guilty, and it's extremely annoying to think not so much that they've got away with the ones that you have arrested them for, but of course that they are free to go out and continue robbing.
One could imagine Donald Barrett, on release from prison, going to work, committing crime, work as he calls it, committing crime on his own, but working with other criminals who know that he has been a Supergrass. It's astounding, and very many of my colleagues have scratched their heads. But what is very clear is that there was a body of opinion amongst criminals that having once been a Supergrass, he could never, ever, ever be a Supergrass again. And they felt that in this case, that he was safer to indulge in criminality with than any other criminal.
I had a meet with at the Little Chef on the Great Cambridge Road. I'd known since 1979 in Maidstone. He said that if I ever informed on him, he'd plot up on me and kill me. He agreed to work with me and we discussed the job.
All right, Don, ready? Yeah. We used to transport Barrett every day from next door to the Old Bailey when he was giving evidence. And he was very uneasy about the giving of his evidence because he knew that the first part of his cross-examination by the defence barrister was going to be regarding his past and the horrendous crimes that he has committed in his past.
I've seen him give evidence in court, and he is very, very impressive. Well, let's say that Mr. Barrett looks the part. He's an extremely fit, hard man and has been for a long time. The sort of thing that people would expect an armed robber to look like.
And £500 suits.
Yes.
Barrett would probably spend more on a tie and handkerchief than I would spend on a suit. He always asks my opinion of what sentence he's going to get, because it's the only thing that preys on his mind. He can't think of anything else.
It's a very difficult decision. I keep saying the word, he's so unique. But personally, I see that the contribution he's made in removing the streets of London, making them much safer, that we need to take account. Also, the Supergrass trial itself, system, is actually on trial.
Certainly on the last occasion that Barrett was arrested and dealt with as a Supergrass, he was sentenced initially to a total of 14 years imprisonment. Now, at that particular time, there were quite a few Supergrasses in the system, and the norm of sentencing was within the region of 5 to 7 years. So at that time, Barrett's sentence was completely out of line with all the others. However, he did appeal against sentence, then in fact it was reduced to 7 years on appeal.
How long was he in for?
He was in custody altogether for somewhere in the region of about 3.5 to 4 years.
Some people would take the view that in light of the crimes that he has committed, perhaps accurately described as one stage from terrorism, that he should be sent away for the rest of his natural days.
Now, I know some senior police officers and colleagues think that the terrible nature of the offences that Barrett has committed, and I don't minimise those whatsoever, he should in fact face the ultimate penalty in the sense of perhaps life imprisonment. I've already said that I don't think that that is appropriate in this case, because I think that we haven't marked the contribution he's made to crime reduction. So on the one scale we've got perhaps 5 years, which was the old maxim, and life on the other. And perhaps tomorrow the judge will view perhaps the middle range, somewhere around about that, as appropriate.
What is very important is that it's not shown in such a light that supergrasses that have been into the system and come out can then look at it and think, well, I've got carte blanche to go out and commit whatever offences I like, because all I have to do is turn supergrass again.
I think credit has got to be given, and it's got to be seen to be given, so that other people will do it in the future.
In the dock at the moment are Mr. Croak and Mr. Barrett, who've been listening intensely to what's been going on. And we're in a position now where after lunch, and in fact just before lunch, the judge heard Mr. Julian Bevan acknowledge the contribution that in fact Barrett has made in the evidence that he's given and the information he's given. And this afternoon, myself and Detective Inspector Grange will go in and give some broad idea of the impact that the evidence that Barrett has given to us has meant to policing in London. And that's where I'm off to now.
Thanks very much.
Late yesterday afternoon, the judge retired. Because there's so many implications involved, and because it's been a very complicated case in many ways, it's absolutely right and proper that he should spend the night mulling over the sort of sentence that he's going to deliver this morning, which should have happened by now, and we'll find out exactly what's happened when the chaps come over.
What's your poll? Good result.
Well, what happened?
The judge has had a sale. Croak, 23 years.
Housekeeper,
Yep.
resident sergeant, contact front office. Please.
Barrett with 50%, no, not 50, 25% reduction, 16 years.
16?
All in all, I think it's a fair result.
Yeah, it's, I thought that Barrett might have got a little less than that. And perhaps he will on appeal.
Indeed.
Yeah. As for Croak, I think a very good sentence, as far as the public is concerned.
Deserves every bit.
Yes.
Well, it was like I spent just over 20 minutes with him.
Really?
And he's still in good spirits.
Yeah.
How are you? You had the results? What do you think?
He's thanked us, we've thanked him, and that's really the end of the matter.
Yeah, nice commendation at the end. Mr. Grange, Paul, Dick, Ray, you, me, Neil Murphy and Colin Ellis for the surveillance at Newport Pagnell. 'Tis. Nice result.
At the touch of a button, he goes.
Mum! And the driver's out of the vehicle. It's definitely target 2.
The known target is carrying a small shoe-type box.
When you saw him standing there, he was exceptionally cool, calm and collected.